Making the decision to use a virtual learning center in your school can come with questions. What does a virtual learning center look like? How do we set up a virtual learning center? How do we transition from the learning center at school to a virtual learning center? The videos in this series are designed to help answer those questions. Laying a solid foundation is always a good place to start. This session will be divided into 3 parts: establishing your procedures, making preparations, and setting up at home. In this video, we'll discuss how to set up your school's virtual learning center by first establishing your procedures. While there are many uncertainties of when or how to implement the virtual learning center, it is important to establish your school's procedures ahead of time. You'll want to be prayerful as you consider your school's mission while developing your procedures for the virtual learning center. Your school's goal should be to stay as close to the A.C.E.'s procedures manual as possible while taking into consideration your new virtual environment. Each school will have a different need and capability to evaluate, so we will highlight some of the important procedures to consider. The first thing your school should consider will be the daily schedule. This will be important for both parents and students because it will give them the when and what to expect during the virtual learning center. For suggestions on preparing a daily schedule, please view our video session, Staying on Schedule. A student's attendance is important, so you'll want to consider how you will count your students' attendance. You should meet with them as a group at the beginning and at the end of each day. You'll then need to consider how many times during the day your students should check in with the school staff to be considered as present based on your school's virtual environment. Some options would be to have the students log in as a group at various times throughout the day, or you could have the students log in individually a certain number of times each day. You could also have your students remain connected in the remote environment all day, but you'll need to be considerate of your students' data usage. We'll discuss a little more in detail later in part 3 of this session. Even though the students will be at home, we recommend deciding on a dress code standard for your students while they're working during the school day. The need for a clothing standard is important because it helps the students recognize they are in a school environment. Your clothing standard should reflect a professional standard for staff and students. Even in the virtual learning center, students will be tempted to earn demerits. A student may become disruptive during the group meeting, or they may not check in with school staff during the day. Try to evaluate possible situations like these and decide when and how you'll issue demerits. Then consider what disciplinary measures will be needed for those demerits. Remember, stay in contact with the parents concerning students' behavior during the virtual learning center. We're working together with the parents as a team. In your procedures, you'll want to evaluate if your current process for homework will work during the virtual learning center or if modifications will be needed. Your homework policy should be clear for staff, students, and parents. One aspect of the homework process that may be difficult for your school to utilize would be the use of homework slips. So, you'll want to consider how your staff will take note of students who have homework, as well as students who weren't able to complete their homework. Our school had 2 goal check sessions. One goal check session was at the end of the day to notate what was homework, and the other was after the opening exercises to notate what homework was incomplete. We've discussed various staff roles in our video, roles and platforms used to facilitate the virtual learning center. You'll want to ensure these are clearly notated in your procedures. This will help minimize any opportunity for confusion. Once you've defined those roles for your school, you'll also want to ensure your staff are aware of their new responsibilities and duties. In your procedures, you'll also want to notate the forms of communication you are using, along with how and when to use them. It is important everyone is aware of these procedures. If 2 students had already messaged the monitor and are waiting to score, it would be inconsiderate of the other's time if a 3rd student, not paying attention to the procedures, jumped in the video session ahead of them. Having your communication procedures identified and written out will help everyone know what is expected. You'll also want to develop procedures for the students' use of technology during the school day. Students should be engaged during the group meetings and should not be surfing the internet on a separate screen. Students should be discouraged from having a mobile device or computer in their workspace. We'll go over this a little more in part 3 of this session. Having your procedures identified and written out will lay a good foundation for how you're going to operate your virtual learning center. Your procedures will help your staff and students and parents feel more comfortable with the change in your school environment. Now that you have your procedures identified, written down, and ready to be sent home, it's time to begin preparing your learning center. To learn more about setting up your virtual learning center, please watch parts 2 and 3 of this session.